Hey guys, and welcome to the very first part of this exciting tutorial mini-series. What seems like an eternity ago, I released a video covering how to work with expressions in Adobe After Effects. Now, Walter got his hands on the video, instantly decided he was going to be a coder for life, and jumped right into developing his very first software program. Well, that went well. Seems like he still has quite a few things to learn when it comes to coding, and maybe so do you. Therefore, in this tutorial mini-series, I will cover how to work with expressions in Adobe After Effects, starting at the very basics, all the way through to programming the matrix. Being the very first part in this mini-series, this is going to be a mid-level beginner tutorial. I will only assume that you have at least watched my 8-part beginner tutorial series on how to use Adobe After Effects, and if you don't know what keyframes are or how to add them to a property, I recommend checking out some of my more basic tutorials first. But now, without further ado, let's jump right into the code. Hey guys, and welcome to the exciting world of Adobe After Effects. And while I do usually start out with an empty composition, I've just got a simple background image in this one because this is going to be a little bit of a coding session and I figured it was going to make it just a little bit less boring. To get started, I'm going to come up into my toolbar, select the text tool, and simply add some text into my composition. In Adobe After Effects, you can add an expression to any property on any of your layers that you can add a keyframe to. So for example, if we were to expand some of these layers, any property that has a stopwatch icon, so you can add keyframes like opacities, position, or if we expand the text layer and then the text tab, the source text, they all have stopwatch icons. So each of these properties you can control with an expression. In order to add an expression to a property, simply hold down the Alt key on your keyboard, that is Alt key, or I believe it's the Option key if you're on a Mac, and then click onto the stopwatch icon. This will add an expression to this property and it will bring up the expression editor. Let me make this a little bit bigger for you guys, and you can simply click on the expression to bring up the editor again. And in here we can now define our expression. And an expression can really be anything from a really simple single line of code to a massive complex mathematical calculation that then at the very end assigns a singular value to the property. So our expression in the end is going to return a single value that is going to be assigned to the source text property. Obviously, what you return in your expression depends on the property you're assigning it to. Source text is a text property, so our expression will return a text, which makes sense. If this was, for example, the opacity property of a layer, then you would return a number because the opacity is a number. If it was a position, you would return an array, and so on and so forth. To show you how this works, let's clear out everything in this expression editor and type quotation mark, something, quotation mark, and a semicolon. Now, the semicolon you don't necessarily need, but I recommend putting a semicolon at the end of every line. It basically tells After Effects that your expression has finished or that line of code is finished, so always end it with a semicolon. It's just good practice. And now if we click outside of the expression editor, After Effects will apply this expression to our source text property, and our text has been set to something. The reason I've added the quotation marks around my something is because in JavaScript, or well, in your expression script, that really defines a string, a piece of text. So we're just telling After Effects to apply the text something to the source text property. And this expression will get evaluated at every single frame, and every single frame will simply return something. So throughout this whole composition, your text is set to something. Let's click back into the expression editor, and it is important to know that the value that will get assigned to your property by the expression is the last value in your expression editor. So if I, for example, entered a new line and typed something else as a string, and now I click outside, now my property is going to be something else because the first line says something, but the value for my source text will be the last line that I have in my expression editor, so it will be something else. For something just slightly more exciting, we can change our expression over to basically combine these two pieces of string with a logical operator. So we can actually change this over to be something in quotation marks plus and then and something else. So we're basically concatenating something and something else into a single string, and that is, well, the last value or the last line in our expression editor. So if we click outside, maybe I'll make this text element just a little bit smaller as well. So now our text is something and something else. So this little expression basically concatenated these two pieces of string and assigned them to the source text property. Next, let's talk about variables, and variables become very useful once your expression kind of goes a little bit past being just a single line. Variables are essentially containers for data or for values. So for example, I can define a new variable by going var, and then I can just come up with whatever name I want. Let's call it my variable. And I can assign something to this variable, so I can go equals to quotation mark variable x. So what I'm doing in this line of code, I'm essentially assigning the string variable x, that's why it's in quotation marks, to a new variable that I'm calling my variable. This now allows me to use my variable like a placeholder in any line of code in this expression after I've defined it. So I couldn't use it in any line previous to this statement because this statement really defines, it specifies and creates a new variable called my variable and assigns data to it. But I can use it in my expression. So for example, I can now change my expression to something plus and, close that quotation mark, plus my variable. And note that I'm not putting quotation marks around my variable because I mean this variable here. I don't mean a piece of text called my variable. I mean this actual object here, this variable, which actually contains variable x. I hope that wasn't too confusing, but let's just click outside and see what happens. And now my text is changed to something and variable x. And variable x is the content of my variable, and so I'm concatenating something and whatever is in my variable, which right now is variable x. If we were to change the contents of my variable to variable y, for example, and click outside, now my text would change to something and variable y. Variables are extremely flexible and powerful, especially once you get into some more complicated expressions. So let's do something just slightly more different and define a new variable called a that we are going to assign 12 to, and this is the number 12, not the text 12. Let's create a new line, create a new variable called b and assign 13 to it. Then create another variable, let's call this one result, and to this one we are going to assign a plus b. And for our last line, remember this is the value that will actually get assigned to our source text. We are going to go a plus, and then in quotation marks, we're going to put plus, yet another plus, b plus, quotation mark equals, quotation mark, plus c. So we are going to spit out the text, whatever is in variable a, plus, an actual plus sign, plus the contents of b, plus equals, is whatever is in c. So if we click outside of the expression editor, something went wrong. And After Effects will tell you that something went wrong. So it tells you this project contains an expression error. And on the left-hand side of your property, you have a little exclamation mark. And you can actually click on this and it will give you an error message. Now, this may look like a whole bunch of gibberish, but it actually tells you that the property or method named C doesn't exist. So in our expression, there's something called C that After Effects has no idea what we mean. So let's say okay to that. Let's look at our expression again. And, well, variable A is here. Variable B is here, but, well, there is no variable called C anywhere. We have a variable called result, but none called C. So let's change C over to result. So we're referring to variable A, B, and result. Let's click outside of the expression editor. And After Effects can do basic math. 12 plus 13 indeed is 25. One last thing before we move on to the next point is that JavaScript is case sensitive. So result refers to our result variable. However, if I spell result with a capital R and click outside the expression editor, it won't work because this result variable with a capital R is not the same as the result variable with a lowercase r. So make sure that you're always using the right case for the variable names and any functions that you call and your parameters and everything else, because JavaScript is case sensitive. Now that we know how to define a basic expression, Obviously, we don't always want to write everything ourselves. Sometimes we want to refer to certain variables and values that already exist on our layer or within our composition to tie things together. And for that, After Effects offers a whole number of different properties, so values that are already defined on your layer or in your composition that you do have access to. And you either remember all of these, or if you actually go over to the left-hand side under source tag, there's this little arrow here, and if you click on that, you actually get access to all of the bits and pieces of data and functions that are available for you to use in your expression. If I go into the Property tab, and apologies, it is a little bit cut off on my screen, it lists all of the expression elements that are available on the property that I'm currently working on. Right here at the very top is one called Value, so let's simply click on that. It will insert that property into our expression, and let's simply click outside. And our text now simply says "ay caramba," and the value property refers to the current value of whatever property you're working in. So right now value refers to whatever the actual value of my source text is, and this is the current keyframe value. So what I can actually do, let's go to the beginning of the composition and simply click, without the Alt key, simply click onto the stopwatch icon for the source text property to add a keyframe. This will create a keyframe for "ay caramba." So let's go about 1 second in and let's change this text to something else. And this will create a new keyframe at 1 second, and let's go forward to about 2 seconds. And again, let's change our text to something else. Now as we scrub through our composition, the text changes, and that is also because our expression is currently set to value, which will always evaluate to the currently keyframed value. To show you what I mean, let's change our expression over to be, in quotation marks, current value plus value. And for good measure, let's also add the semicolon at the end. Let's click outside of the expression editor. And now our text will be, well, current value plus whatever the current keyframe value is. The great thing about using value in your expression is that you're free to modify it before you assign a potentially modified value to your source text. So for example, what we could do is we could go value.toLowercase, open round bracket, close round bracket, and make sure that you get the casing correct on the name. So that's a lowercase t, uppercase L, and an uppercase C. It's called camel casing in coding lingo. And this is a simple JavaScript function that will convert the current value to lowercase. So it'll lowercase all of the capital letters in the text. And if we now click outside, notice how our actual value, the text that we've keyframed, is now lowercased. Let's go a little bit more hardcore and let's remove the toLowercase function call, and I will discuss functions a bit later, so for now just follow along and enjoy the ride. Let's change this to .split, open round brackets, put a pair of quotation marks in there, close round bracket, .reverse, again all lowercase, open round bracket, close round bracket, .join, open round bracket, quotation mark, close round bracket, and a semicolon. Now let's click outside of the expression editor. And now what will happen is that looks really wonky, but actually all we've done is we're assigning to our current text current value, colon, and then we're reverting the current value that we've got assigned. So this says eat my shorts in reverse. This says can't sleep, clown will eat me, in reverse. So we actually have a whole lot of control to what happens to our keyframe value before it gets assigned to our property. Obviously, the value is not the only property that you can access, so let's quickly wipe this out. And again, you can remember these, or you can simply look them up through this little quick access menu. Let's simply come up into Global, and let's select Time. So we're going to assign the current time value of our composition to this piece of text. So let's click outside. And as we scrub through, it's basically a time counter, and every second will be 1. So this is 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. So time is just a continuous variable that always evaluates to the current time in your composition. If you don't like the overly detailed fractional part of this number, we can simply come back into our expression, go to the beginning and then type math dot, and yes, that is math with a capital M, because again it refers to a JavaScript variable, and JavaScript is case sensitive, so make sure you write this with a capital M. And then type round, open round bracket, time, close round bracket, and again, for good measure, add a semicolon. If we now click outside, we now only have full seconds, and we got rid of that fractional part. And there are tons of other elements that you can inject into your expression For example, you can come into the quick access menu, go for properties, and these are layer properties, and maybe we'll select name. So name is going to refer to the actual name of the layer. And so now our text is just going to be the name of the layer, independent of what value we have keyframed. Let's select everything in our expression editor so we can replace it. Let's come up into global and select this comp. So we're now referring to the composition as a whole. However, if you now click outside of the expression editor, all you're going to see is this weird square bracket object comp square bracket. This is just JavaScript telling you that the value is actually an object in itself. It's something that has a lot of sub-properties, so it's a complex object, not just a single value. And we actually need to access the properties of this object via something called dot notation. So we can go this comp, and we know that this refers to a composition. So we can go dot to say, out of this composition, I want to access a property. And again, we can go through the quick menu, and we can come into comp, and these are all the properties available on a composition. So we can now go name, for example. So now we're referring to the name of the composition. And if we click outside of the expression editor, that is going to be tutorial, because the name of our composition is tutorial. If I change this to say expression tutorial, suddenly my expression will return expression tutorial, because that is the name of the current composition. And there's a ton of other cool things we can do. For example, we can come in here and type key, open round bracket, and then a number. And this number refers to one of the keyframes on this property. So this is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So if we go key 1, close round bracket, semicolon, this will return the value of the first keyframe. So it will always be ay caramba. If I change this over to a 2, we're now saying, give me the value of the second keyframe on this property. So this is always going to be eat my shorts. And there's so many cool things. You can go num keys, which actually gives you the number of keyframes, and you can concatenate this into really complex expressions. For example, and I'm not saying this is terribly complex, but for the level we're at, this probably seems quite complex. Let's type in quotation marks layer plus name. So this is going to refer to the name of the layer, plus, again, quotation marks, has, plus keys, open and close round brackets, because again, this is a function call, but I am going to discuss functions a bit later on, plus, in quotation marks, keyframes, dot, value at time, plus, math dot round, and again, math with a capital M, time, and we've done this before, this will give us just the full seconds, plus, in quotation mark, is, plus, nearest key, and key with a capital K, open round bracket, time, close round bracket, and a semicolon. And now if we click outside of the expression editor, hang on to your pants, we're going to create an error. And again, we're being notified that there's something not right with our expression. And if we come over into the little exclamation mark and click on that, it's going to tell us that keys is not a function. So this here, keys, is not a function. It doesn't actually exist, and it's because I mistyped it. I actually wanted to have num keys, again with a capital K. Let's click outside of the expression editor. Still doesn't work. So again, let's come onto the exclamation mark and click on here. And the reason I'm showing you this is because it is quite easy to get into problems with expressions, and it's really important to understand how to diagnose and fix those issues. However, this error message is a little less useful, and it says invalid numeric result divide by 0, which is kind of coding talk for someone didn't deal with this exception properly, so we're just going to give you a really generic error message. However, an easy way to diagnose these problems is actually to cut down your expression and to take things out to see which ones are the ones causing the issue. So let's go into our expression. Layer plus name has num keys plus keyframes value add. I'm quite confident that these ones are correct. Math round time, pretty sure. Plus is nearest key time, not quite sure. So let's just take this out for a second. Let's click outside the expression editor. Yeah, and that sure seems to work. However, if we now add this last piece back in, we're getting the error. So we know that this last snippet here, this nearest key time, is actually what is causing the problem. And if you're not quite sure on something and you have identified the specific function or property you're using that is causing the issue, the best place to go is the Adobe reference for the expression language. And I'm just going to switch over to Chrome. this is the link that gets you the expression language reference, and this is really useful, and I'm going to include this link in the description of the video because it contains information about all of the different elements that are available to you when you're doing expressions. And in here, let's search for nearest key. That's not the one. That's not the one either. Here it is, nearest key with a parameter, which is our time. Return type is a key or a marker key. So this function doesn't actually return a piece of text. It actually returns a key or a marker key property. So let's go back to After Effects. So this one here is not actually a piece of string, and which is why this whole thing is failing. So if I go to the end here, place a dot, because again, this is actually going to give me a complex object, and I need to get a sub-property out of that. I can come over into the quick access. And there it is, key. That's what's being returned by this nearest key thing. It's a key object, and that has 3 properties, value, time, and index. So let's simply use value, click outside, and there you go. Actually, I'm going to shrink this layer down just by a little bit. And now if I scrub through, we can see layer iCaramba has 3 keyframes. Value at time 1 is eat my shorts. At time 2, it's can't sleep, clown will eat me. And then the only thing that changes is the time, but we've essentially chained together a whole bunch of different properties and functions, and again, functions will be discussed later, into a more complex expression. And there are so many more cool things that you can do with expressions, and I am going to cover them in more parts for this expressions mini-series. Now, I feel that this tutorial is getting a little bit long already, so I'm going to stop here and just give you some time to digest it all and to play around with these basic expressions, look through the reference, and just get used to some of the cool stuff that you can already do with the very basics for expressions in Adobe After Effects. And that's all there is to it. I hope you enjoyed the first part in this tutorial mini-series, and as always, if you do have any comments, questions or suggestions, just leave them down in the section below. If you did enjoy this video, I would greatly appreciate it if you could give it a thumbs up, favorite it and share it with the world. And don't forget to subscribe if you do want to see more cool filmmaking and visual effects tutorials. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I will see you later.